Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Board of Directors, of the Vallecitos Water District, for Wednesday, December 6, 2017. And could I ask Director Sinella to lead us in the pledge?
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Present.
Here. Present.
Here.
Here. Okay, next is the adoption of the agenda for this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda for this meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Carries unanimously. Okay, next is public comment, and I don't have anybody requesting to speak at this point in the agenda, so we'll move on to the consent calendar.
Move to approve. Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Okay, item 2.1, annual board transition.
All right, I'll take that. So item 2.1 involves the annual board reorganization. And this is the meeting where the new president and vice president are selected. I have provided the board members prior to the meeting with a list going back to 2007, naming who the president was and who the vice president was. And hopefully that'll help you in the selection process here. It has been the district's practice in the past to have the current vice president ascend to the chair of presidency. So if that helps. And then upon the selection of the new president, vice president, we will reconfigure the seating, and the new president will preside over the remainder of the meeting. So,
I move to appoint Jim Hernandez as chair.
Maybe we should take these separately in a vote, the president and vice president? Okay.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to appoint Director Hernandez as the incoming president. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Carries unanimously.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Director Hal Martin to a vice chair for
Second.
2018.
It's been moved and seconded to appoint Director Martin as incoming vice president. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'd like to abstain.
Okay. We have 4 ayes and 1 abstention.
Very good. Take
so I would
rotation of the
I would
chairs.
suggest that maybe
Yeah.
Directors Hernandez and Edeltharp just trade seats.
Very good.
If that satisfies the board. And Director Hernandez, I believe you have something for Director
Yes, my
Edeltharp.
first official act, after I get my act together. Alan left.
Yeah, we could do it.
Oh. It's okay, they'll blame Craig for my mistakes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Congratulations, Jimbo.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Pardon?
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a tough campaign,
I know.
but somebody had to be
It
involved
was
in
your
it.
signs and mailers that really
I'll
pushed it
remove
over the
those
edge.
this evening.
Pushed it right over the edge.
Thank you all very much. And as my first official act, let me award the traditional President's Book. And I believe a photo is in order, and with the full board, if I hope. Yes, the full board. Let's go down. Absolutely.
Uh-oh. Somebody gets spotted.
You know, there's a workman comp.
I know.
there. You know, somebody spot that young man.
Yeah,
Don't fall.
yeah.
Yeah, that was,
Okay, I couldn't remember the exact
yeah,
wording.
it was, just so that, it was part of that, so, I mean, so we didn't want to have to. Do that now.
Assume that that's only 2 or 3% until they come off of where I'm looking to be and
I stick with that.
Another one,
I think you're there.
and then always my backup plan.
All right. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I just want to say this has been an honor to serve the ratepayer in this capacity. I've learned quite a bit this year, and it's actually been fun. Thank you.
All right.
Easier than last year,
Very
year
good.
before.
Any lost implements? Item number 2.2, committee meetings and representatives. For the committee meetings, with the board's approval, I would like to leave the committees, standing committees, as they are. And because that is actually out of policy, I need a unanimous approval for that.
I second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, standing committees will remain the same. Appointments for the representatives, we have one change, and that is Director Martin would like to step down from the Aqua Energy Committee, and in his place, Director Ellithorpe will take that. And do I need a motion for that approval, sir?
I don't believe so.
That being the case, that was completed. The board appointment of representatives, I would also like to leave that as it stands. And I don't think we need a vote on that either, do we?
Yeah, second.
Oh, second? And I'm sorry, ma'am?
I
A
don't
vote's
think
not
so.
needed. Very good. Thank you. We'll move on from there. Thank you all, board members, for your help on getting through that one. Item number 2.3, the audit.
Okay, well, I'll kick it off, and then Wes will come up. So every year, the district prepares an annual financial statement to present the district's financial position. And as a best financial practice, we also have that financial statement audited by an outside auditing firm. So tonight, you'll be hearing from our outside auditing firm to give you the results of their audit, as well as district staff to hear the results from the 2016-2017 financial statement. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wes Owen, our accounting supervisor.
Good evening, President Hernandez, members of the board. Scott Mano is here from our auditing firm, Rogers, Anderson, Mallory, and Scott, and he's going to give you a brief presentation, and then I'll go into a lot more detail after he's done.
Mr. President, members of the board, my name is Scott Mano. I'm a partner at the firm Rogers, Anderson, Mallory, and Scott. And we perform the audit of the district's financial statements for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2017. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what the audit was and what we did. And then I'll take any questions at the end. That's good. The audit objective, the objective of our audit is to express an opinion on management's financial statements. And I say it every year, and it's a point that I love to stress. Of this document that you have in front of you, I only claim 3 pages, 2 or 3 pages, pages 1, 2, and 3. That's it. Everything else is management. And how we do render an opinion is we gather and evaluate sufficient, appropriate, what we call sufficient, appropriate audit evidence. And it provides a reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. And I know Director Martin loves that term, reasonable assurance. And it's an opinion as to whether the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects with generally accepted accounting principles. And I say reasonable assurance because we can't provide absolute assurance. I mean, we could, and again, I say it at every meeting, we could, but we would never leave here because we would have to look at every transaction and verify every transaction to provide absolute assurance. And we provide reasonable assurance. The auditing standards we follow are generally accepted auditing standards, the minimum auditing requirements and reporting guidelines of California Special Districts, and that is promulgated by the State Controller's Office. And generally accepted government auditing standards. Usually you have a single audit if you follow those. A single audit's audit of federal awards. Responsibilities, management. Again, management's responsible for the financial statements, not me. They're responsible to have complete and accurate financial records and a comprehensive framework of internal controls. The governing body, you have a fiduciary responsibility over the district. And you ensure management fulfills its obligations on internal control. The auditor, I accumulate sufficient appropriate audit evidence to support my opinion on the financial statements. And the opinion on the financial statements was an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can provide on a set of financial statements. And again, we evaluate the statements, determine whether they're fairly presented and free of material misstatement in accordance with GAAP. And we form an opinion. An unmodified opinion is the statements are fairly stated in all material respects. And again, that's the highest level of assurance we can provide, and that's what we provided. That's what our opinion says. It's an unmodified opinion. And that's a brief overview of what we do. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, I have a statement to make, if I may. The Finance and Investment Committee recommended the audit financial statements be presented to the full board for approval. We concurred with them after quite a few meetings with Scott, and I want to thank you very much for answering all the many questions that I had.
That's what we're here for.
No matter how repetitious they were. Really appreciated you, and Brianna, you did a great job. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
I'll just,
Yes.
also being on the finance committee, I'll echo our chairman of the committee's sentiments on that as well. It's always a pleasure working with you, Scott, on this. I think this is our second or third year that we've done this with you, and your team has always done a great job, and they're super professional. And again, thank you for doing our audit.
Thank you. I want to thank the staff. Staff's great. You guys got a great staff. Even when John left, Wes was able to step up and keep the ball rolling for him, so.
I did have two questions. One, in one of the items from GAA, whoever, a single triggering event.
Single audit.
Single, but it was a worded trigger in there, single trigger.
If you have a single audit, which is if you receive federal funds, you expend $750,000 in federal funds, that triggers a single audit. And that means that that particular grant will be specifically audited under the uniform guidance.
I see.
So that's typically when you have governmental, when you need to do it in accordance with governmental auditing standards, it's typically because it's a single audit.
And we didn't have that?
No.
Oh, very good. And then secondly, we can use the term, which was your best opinion,
Unmodified.
unmodified, when they want to take us to jail because something went awry, we had an unmodified opinion from our accountant, and you're going to go with us.
No problem.
Okay.
You bring a toothbrush to our meeting?
Yeah.
I asked those questions.
That's-
I'll bring
see?
He'll bring a
Thank you, Val.
toothbrush.
He almost asked that exact question.
I bet he almost, don't tell me you're rubbing off on me, please,
Yeah,
please,
scary.
please, okay.
That's scary.
That's
All
the
right.
reasonable assurance.
All right, all right. All right, thank you very much, and we are going to ask for the adoption of the financial audit.
So moved.
Well, you still have a staff presentation
Oh,
to talk about the
geez.
financial statement.
We're not paying
You
them.
feel bad?
Okay, see, I've already made a mistake. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, Scott, is this the end of our contract with you, and are you going to be, are you one more year?
We believe it may be the end. I think there's an issue that's going
I see. Well, I was gonna say, they were right, you've done a wonderful job.
I could try to-
I hope we'll see you again.
I could try to clarify. The RFP went for a 3-year term with the possible extensions, but in the contract, it didn't mention anything about extensions. It talked about a 3-year contract.
Aha.
So,
You're going to bring that back to us as to how to resolve that?
yeah, we'll process it as staff, and we'll bring it forward to the board when it's time to talk about new auditing services.
Very good. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, sorry. I'm new at the job.
Unfortunately, we're not done yet.
You go anywhere without the water bottle?
No, I brought this just for you, and look, I put it on your side, too.
He plans to be there a while, apparently.
Thank
Oh,
you. Yeah, I'm gonna say, it should be a long.
Good evening once again. I want to say congratulations, President Hernandez, Vice President Martin, and Director Elthorpe. Thank you for your service. It was a great year. Looking forward to another great one. Let's see what we can do.
Hey, Wes, can you do me a favor? Can you lift the microphone up just a little bit? Scott has a really deep voice, but.
I'll try to speak louder too if I can. Okay. So as Mr. Amato mentioned, the financial statements are the responsibility of management. We claim the other 57 pages. And that being said, staff works diligently during the year to record transactions and prepare the financials to assure that they're accurate, complete, and fairly presented. So I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about the audited financial report. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of numbers, but we're proud of them, so I'll do my best to make it as exciting as possible. The contents of the annual financial report, it starts with the independent auditor's report on page 1. It's one of the pages that Mr. Miles is responsible for. And then it goes on to the management's discussion and analysis. Then the financial statements, which are made up of the statements in that position, the statements of revenues, expenses, and changes in that position, and the statements of cash flows. After the financial statements, you have the notes to the financial statements, and finally, the supplementary information. I'm going to focus tonight on the management's discussion analysis because it serves as a summary of the financial statements, and it gives us a chance to brag about the accomplishments of the district during the year. And all the slides and tables I talk about tonight will be on pages 4 through 11 of the annual financial report. I believe you have a copy if you want to follow along. Some of the financial highlights in 2017. Water costs increased by $5.2 million as a result of increase in demand and our first full year of desalinated water. In February of 2017, the district rescinded drought level 1. This attributed to a $4.4 million increase in water sales. Unfortunately, water costs still exceed water sales. The district received $6.6 million in capacity fee revenue from development during the year, up from $3.1 million in the previous year. The district expended $3.9 million in capital asset acquisitions during the year, down from $9.3 million in the previous year. This slide shows the changes in net position of the district during the year. And this is on page 5 of the annual financial report. For the second year in a row, I ran ahead of myself there, the operating expenses exceeded the operating revenues, resulting in a net operating loss of $1.5 million. However, the net position of the district increased by $4.9 million after capital contributions of $6.8 million. Some other financial highlights during 2017, the district paid down $3.3 million in long-term debt without incurring any additional debt. Fitch Rating affirmed the district's AA+ rating with a stable outlook in May of 2017. And the board approved a cost of service and rate structure study in June of 2017 with rates effective January 1, 2018. So in the next few slides, I'm going to do some current year to prior year analysis. This slide shows the district's net position as of June 30th, 2017, and it is on page 6 of the annual financial report. Some of the highlighted items, the cash investments increased by $6.5 million from last year to this year. Capital assets actually decreased by $4.3 million as a result of depreciation in excess of capital additions. Other assets increased by $0.3 million, driven by increases in accounts receivable for water and sewer sales. Deferred outflows of resources increased by $2.8 million as a result of projected versus actual earnings in our retirement plan as calculated by CalPERS. Current liabilities increased by $0.7 million as a result of increases in accounts payable for water purchases and connection fees. And non-current liabilities increased by $0.2 million as a result of an increase in net pension liability. And finally, deferred inflows decreased by $0.5 million as a result of changes in actuarial assumptions, and our retirement plan also is calculated by CalPERS. So the next couple slides are on page 8 of the annual financial report. I broke it out into revenues and expenses just to make it a little more presentable. And you can see in the pie chart here that our major sources of revenue are water sales at 37%, sewer service charges at 26%, and ready to serve at 22%. And these percentages are comparable to previous years. Some of the highlighted items: the property taxes increased by $0.3 million as a result of receipts from discontinued redevelopment agencies. We expect these to decrease in the future. Reclaimed water sales increased by $0.6 million as a result of increased customer usage and more flows to Meadowlark. Other revenues decreased by $1 million due to less annexation fees being collected in 2017. So this slide is also on page 8 of the annual financial report. This shows, it's actually the bottom half of the table. It shows the district's expenses during the year. And some of the highlighted items are: the interest expense decreased by $0.4 million. That's a result of the refunding debt costs in the previous year in 2016. Transmission and distribution increased by $0.6 million due to multiple main breaks during the year. And other expenses decreased by $4.9 million as a result of a major accounting change at Encina in 2016. Continue on page 9 and 10 of the annual financial report. The management discussion analysis talks about some restrictions, commitments, and limitations of the district, such as the district has $62.8 million in long-term debt outstanding as of June 30th, 2017. And the district is contractually obligated through at least the design phase for some capital projects such as the San Marcos Interceptor, Meadowlark Tank Number 3, the Mount Bell Pump Station, Rock Springs Sewer, the Chlorine Contact Tank Expansion, and the Moneo Gravity Outfall. Page 10 of the annual financial report lists some significant additions to capital assets during the year. Some of these are $2.4 million for water mains, service lines, meters, and valves, $1.4 for reclamation equipment, $0.6 for sewer mains, manholes, and cleanouts, $0.6 for sewer vehicles and equipment, and $0.3 million for buildings and improvements. And finally, on the last page of the management discussion analysis, we talk about some economic factors that were considered in preparing the 2018 budget. Some of these I've already talked about, but they're the increased water usage due to drought restrictions being rescinded, the cost of service and rate structure study completed in June 2017, the slow but steady recovery in construction, and increasing regulatory compliance. That concludes my presentation for the night. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Do I see any questions? We have no questions. Thank you very much, but we do have some publics. Oh, yes, Director
I
Snell?
don't know if Hal wanted to say something as the chair, but I'll also, again, just like with Scott West, you and the rest of the team were unbelievable to work through this process. It's always a pleasure going through this. I know numbers are not sexy. They are what they are, but you guys do a really good job at presenting it and making it all work out so we can understand it as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.
President?
Yes.
Yeah, and I would like to say something. I think, Sean, I can't tell you how much I appreciated you being in those meetings and being in these meetings when you have your laptop and you have answers that nobody else has. So I really appreciate that. You did a great job in the committee, bringing it down to a level that I could understand, when sometimes it was up a little bit higher than my understanding.
Thanks, sir.
So I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I should have asked Scott when he was still here, but sometimes during the audit process, they make some recommendations on process changes. Yeah, was there anything recommended out of the audit?
There was. So this year they had one recommendation. They discussed the personal payroll files, whether they're, because currently we input them through the payroll system. They had actually recommended that we could enter them through the HR system, and HR would have access to our financial system. That's not the way it's functioning right now, but they said it's now broken, so we don't really need to fix it. but they did note that.
Okay.
But that was pretty much it this year.
Okay, great, thank
If I
you.
may, that was the only thing that was brought up, that when whatever it is, the payment's changing to that employee through that it go through Rondi, or Rondi have a final say at it. But I think we discussed it, and the GM's fully aware of that situation. But that was the only thing that was brought up. And not there was a problem with it, just that there was another check and balances that we didn't have in place, but wasn't needed.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
We have one public speaker.
Who would that be?
His name here, Mr. Mike Hutzecker. Personal best, might I tell you about this. 3 in a row.
I never used to think so, but audits can be fun to go through. I didn't see any mention to our reserves anywhere. Is it, why is this discussion missing? There was an investment in EWA of about $2.5 million. How was that paid for? Administrative credits, that's on page 57, I believe. What are these transfers? Where does the money come from? The purchase floor of CalPERS. I think that needs some definition as to what purchasing floor means, when it's triggered, whether it's by an individual retiree or if it's a 1-year annual increase from some index. What index does that include? There's been a major change in the capital improvement deficits for new facilities. I was wondering how that drop occurred. I know there was more money coming in from new development, but it seems if we're having deferred payments, there should be some note in some list somewhere of just how much those deficits are, who owes it, and it should be on the financial report. Let's see. On the OPB, there was almost $600,000 for 28 people. This came out to a little over $20,000 per individual. That sounds like a fairly rich medical insurance program. The cash equivalents, you mentioned the bond, we have to have a 1.15 premium on revenue. Is that for the whole district or just for that one bond? I've seen a lot of these bonds, and typically, if you retain a reserve, then you don't have to have a 15% premium on all of your revenue. There are a lot of bond investment risk, but the short-term bonds, that is the predominant of what you have here, is a good way to avoid bond interest rate increases. Let's see now. What are the administrative transfers?
Mike, I know you probably have a nice list there.
No, I had,
I'm going to ask the manager to get with staff, and if you wouldn't mind answering his questions. And if you're not happy with
I'll
the
bring him
answers or
back.
whatever, you're
Yeah.
probably coming back.
We'd be happy to do that.
Very good. Thank you, sir. All right. Item next. 2.4, award of professional services agreement for the underground basin study. Oh, I'm sorry. We have to,
Move to approve?
we have a motion here.
To approve. Second.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Keep me appraised of this. Okay, now 2.4.
Thank you, President Hernandez, members of the board. This is the award for professional services agreement for groundwater basin study. Starts on page 140 of the award packet. As you may recall, originally the groundwater item was discussed at the full board. The board delegated to the engineering equipment committee to go further, give staff direction on which way to move forward on if exploring the possibility of using groundwater in Vallecitos Water District. Initial direction from the committee was to look at basically the yield of the basin, how much water is there, where can we get the water. And after doing some homework and meeting with 2 different consulting firms and talking with our neighboring agencies that are embarking in similar type of endeavors, we've discovered that that's somewhere between $500,000 plus venture. We brought this back to the Engineering and Equipment Committee, and the committee's new direction was to look at funding sources for possibly doing this type of study. Staff went out and met with a couple different consultants, mainly RMC, or now called Woodward Kern. We met with them because they did the Encina study for their water reuse. They did the North County Recycled Water Coalition studies for funding, and they also are on the team for both Livenhain and I believe Rainbow's groundwater basin study on the funding component. So they're funding experts as far as getting grants and funding for these type of studies and others. With that, one of the prime questions that they ask is the district needs to figure out where and what funding pool is appropriate. In other words, there's more than one funding opportunity. Do you want to use groundwater? How do you want to use it? Is it a water reuse project, a recycled water project, or a potable water use project, a desalination of brackish groundwater project? These are questions that we didn't have. So we asked them to put together a scope and fee. And within that, we basically went into a kind of a discussion on what items would be pertinent and valuable to bring back to this board. On page 140, you can see the 3 options that we looked at, and really option 1 is a recycled water option. And we use this basin for recycled water use. Option 2 is evaluating as a potable water option, which means the existing groundwater, figuring out the yield of the existing groundwater, seeing if there's extra, and can we use that as potable water. And option 3 is really your water reuse option, getting advanced treated water, putting it into the basin, taking it back up, treating it, indirect potable reuse option. So those are kind of the 3 main buckets of money, so to speak, for funding that's available for a groundwater type project. The other objective of this study was really to look at, from a board standpoint, what decision tools that the board will need. So within the scope of the study, we asked them to come up with different items. For each one of these 3 options, staff wanted to be able to present to the board, what's the cost per acre foot? What's the estimated cost to develop this option? How long will it take to develop this option? Is this a 2-year project? Is this a 10-year project? What's the legal ramifications and the risk involved? So in other words, is this a project, if we move down this road, that will take 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and there might be a 20 to 30% chance of even getting any water out of it? What are some of those legal hurdles and obstacles that we may be faced with moving forward? And lastly, the funding potentials. So how much funding is available going down the potable water or the recycled water or the water reuse options? And with that, if we're successful getting funding, what does the cost per acre foot look like? So this way, the intent of the study is to bring back to the board not only the 3 options, the funding pool, but give the board a sense of timing and the cost per acre foot to really vet this subject out to see if it's something that is worthwhile for the board to direct staff to pursue. With that, you can see I put the fiscal impacts. This is a unbudgeted item, so this would be a new budget request for this fiscal year. There's some existing expenditures from staff. The consultant's initial fee was actually $54,953, but with the legal aspect of it, it made it down to $70,222. That's correct. And with that, it's basically up for board discussion. But if the board chooses to move forward, we'd need a recommendation to obviously create a new budget item for this, and an authorization to enter into a contract with RMC, now Woodward Kern. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And if I may add real quickly to that, so if you look at the numbers in the budget, the only money that would be leaving the agency is the money that would go to the consultant, the $70,000. The rest is more or less an accounting mechanism for us to keep track of the time for staff and overhead costs. But it's important to track that because if we were eligible for a grant, those funds would be eligible for reimbursement as well.
Director Martin.
I've got a question, James. A couple of questions, actually. The first one was, we put some money into this project 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, getting a modified study from someone. Do you remember what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
we got a grant through our master planning consultant through the state revolving fund, which was a 50-50 grant. And we looked at not just groundwater, but we looked at other water resource uses for potable water. Now, the big difference here is that grant and that mechanism for a state revolving fund was just looking at the viability of what the existing studies are and putting some numbers together to say if we were to go for these different type of avenues, what would the approximate cost per acre feet be? It did not look at funding sources. It didn't look at any type of detail. To really do that, you really need that $500,000 to $650,000+ study to really kind of even vet the borders and the yield. You know, how much water is coming in, how much water is coming out, and is there any left over?
How much did we spend on that 50-50 project?
Was it about 160 or 180? Yeah, about $170,000 for consulting fees
And
on
we
that,
had-
and we'll get 75,000 back.
Okay. And we have really, that doesn't come into play on this. I mean, now this is something completely different.
Yes, they both have groundwater in the subject, absolutely, but they are completely separate, because we can't even go after the state revolving fund, because they both have groundwater in the
Okay,
subject.
who performed the first one? What was the name of that company?
Black and Beach.
And now this one, you've already selected someone.
Yes, we went with RMC due to their existing experience, both working with the three
Okay,
agencies I
so, but
mentioned.
the first one was kind of, in hindsight, it was highly speculative.
Mhm.
There's no return on investment with that. Same as with this one. It's looking for gold. If you hit it, you're a winner. If you don't, oh well, you're all losers. I mean, it's highly speculative as well.
Yeah, we're at the stage with our groundwater basin where any type of information is speculative unless we want to spend some really high dollars on it. So you're absolutely correct on that. However, what this will do is kind of give a framework in which the board can look at how speculative it is. Is it a 10-year process that's, you have some assurances? Is it a 3-year process with no assurances? Is it a process that could take 20 years and at the end of it you get not a drop of water? And also with that, putting the numbers together, not only the grant opportunities, but the theoretical, you would have to build this type of infrastructure, which would cost you X amount of dollars an acre foot. So this way, the idea situation at the end of it is the board will have a dollar per acre foot number, a risk feeling as far as within the report, and a time. You know, it's a 2, 5, 10-year process.
And tell us how this process is different than a Liebenheinz process, where they bid off a little bit, and then a little more, I think from the same contractor. Well, we got this far, but another 200,000 will get you a little further, and now they're in it for, I think, $2 million?
Pretty close.
And not
yeah.
a drop of water.
So, yeah, so this process is really, they skipped this process. They already knew how they wanted to use the water. So Liebenheim already made a decision, and I don't know when or how they made the decision, but there's a lot more information about their basin. And the basin's actually quite a bit larger. So they already knew that there's additional yield in the basin. So there's amount of people, amount of pumpers pumping out of that basin, but they already knew there was additional yield. So their scope was how much additional water is available for us to take out safely without damaging the basin. And that was the initial 600,000 plus scope that they had. Within that scope, they had a grant funding component, which this consultant was part of. And then their next scope, after they finished that, was now we're going to go after grants to actually start figuring out where we could get that water from.
But they're in it themselves about $2 million.
Yes, the difference for us, to address your question, is Vallecitos Water District, we have less information about the San Marcos Basin than they have. The basin is quite a bit smaller. And because of the lack of information, there's not a clear direction in the best use for that basin, the best potential use for that basin. So what this does is it really puts a toe in the water to say we could use the basin for A, B, or C, option 1, 2, or 3. And this is the road, if you choose that road, this is how difficult that road is or how easy that road is.
Do you have any idea how many people now pump water out of our basin? And if we were to take water out of that basin, the lawsuits would start to mount very quickly. How many people now are taking water out?
I don't have an exact number, but my understanding is that between historic pumpers and existing pumpers, you have over 100 registered wells. And I don't know if that's a big number for a basin or not, because a lot of them are very small. With that, we also don't know how many of those wells still are in existence, or how many of them have been completely abandoned, because when we tried to do a search with the county only kept paper records. They don't have a database for it. So anything that was put in after 1984 or 5, they have a database for it. But anything that was put in prior to the mid-'80s, they have to go through each parcel, look for a well on that parcel, pull the file, pull the paper file. So that's a task that obviously they're not going to do for free, and we haven't done either.
And am I right in my assumption, that you've heard the same story, was there fact to it, that in 1955, the reason this water company was put together was because the wells that were just doing ag at the time, with very limited population at the time, were running dry, and they had to get water from other sources. That would tell me now that you have 95, almost 100,000 residents on top of that water. Will this study make you comfortable in making a determination whether to move forward or not? Will it give you enough information, or is this just one of another study and another study and another study?
I could honestly say this study will give me enough comfort to bring to the board kind of a roadmap of the options, the costs associated with those options. This study itself another study doesn't need to be done to go down that road. The board would have to choose and give staff direction to choose a path before another study would have to be brought back to the board. In other words, this is not a building block study, because at the end of the study, if there's a direction, let's just say water reuse is the direction and advanced water treatment is the direction, that's what the board choose through this process. A whole new study would have to be, similar to what Livenheim did, a whole new study would have to be done, and that's really the first study going down that path. And then the grant funding going down that path. This study itself is really kind of an additional step that was conceived through the committee's direction to say, hey, where can we get to a point where we can make a decision without spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a consultant?
Thank you, James. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, but I'm obviously not a groundwater expert, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this. But, so I saw that, the pictures of where the basin is, and, because it's a basin, obviously it's kind of in the middle, kind of in the hole of the city, if you will, and kind of in between our treatment plant and our main storage tanks in Twin Oaks. What would be, and maybe you guys talked about this as the engineering committee, and what's the plan? Let's say there is some water there. What would we do with it? Would we pump it up to, would we have to treat it somewhere and then pump it back to Twin Oaks, or how's it all gonna work? What's the vision?
And that was exactly what we want to do. You know that I've been the one pounding this drum from the beginning. What I hope this study would do, as James has indicated, is tell us just that. What is not the plan, but there are potentially 3 plans, and it would tell us, if you chose plan A, as James mentioned, you're going to have to build a plant, retreat the water, and that water is going to be X dollars per acre foot. Plan B, same thing, Plan C. Then, if the board chooses any one of them, or they may just say, hey, we've looked at this, and the cheapest method is $5,000 an acre foot. No one's gonna buy that kind of water, so we do not need to look at another study to do anything. We can move on. But in my opinion, until we do this limited study, we still are guessing about the amount of water that's there, what we could do with it, how much it's gonna cost. At least this study will put an end to that speculation.
And if I may add, Director Sinella, this study won't get into the level of detail that I think you were getting at, like what pipelines need to be put in, where would it tie into our distribution system. We'll just know, is there water available? What would it cost us? What would we have to do to get it to drinking water quality? And what would it cost to do that?
So, and just to add to that, it will tell us if you need to build something major, like a treatment plant, and of course, the legal portion of it will tell you the legal hurdles that could be in your way and the timing associated with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but of the options A, B, C, or whatever, how many there might be, we know we just can't take it out of the ground and drink it straight, right? So we're gonna have to do something with it, put it through our treatment system, pump it somewhere. Are the options based off of your engineering knowledge of, you have a rough idea that if we got water out of the ground, we're gonna have to do something with it. Are they viable options based off of what you know? If we have, for example, if we have to build another treatment plant somewhere else within the district, does that just automatically rule it out?
Not necessarily. So if there is a yield of water that is relatively inexpensive to get out of the ground, and the quality of the water is relatively good, which we don't know those informations, and we won't know all that information from this study. But the study will tell you if that water is below X amount per acre foot to get out of the ground, then it may be viable to build a treatment plant. Because there's a lot, in a lot of more robust groundwater basins, the water is actually fairly inexpensive to get out of the ground. But the options, to get to your first question, the options that are vetted out really are looking at the funding sources. There are really three type of funding sources when it comes to groundwater basins for a development of a groundwater basin. Not a cleanup, but a development of a groundwater basin. And they really are recycled water use. In that case, you wouldn't need a treatment plant necessarily, because if we could prove that we could put recycled water in the basin, take recycled water out of the basin, but you need a recycled water distribution system. And that could be estimated from a cost-wise. We won't have a layout in the study, but there's going to be an estimation of the cost to build that infrastructure.
Is that a fancy way of saying purple pipe?
Purple pipe, yes.
So let me stop you, because this is good information for me. I've always been told, since I've been on the board here, that the reason why we sell our recycled water to other districts is because purple pipe, that infrastructure would just be too cost prohibitive to do. So why do we think now, with a potential of finding some groundwater, that that's even viable?
I don't know if it is, but what I was getting at in the first part was the three main funding sources that are available for groundwater basin development for a district like ours. What we're looking for is the purple pipe option.
Okay.
What Livenheim's doing is there extra groundwater that we could take out and put to a treatment plant and just put into our drinking water system? Or is there a water reuse option where we get advanced treated water from EWA or from Meadowlark, put it into the ground, let it sit there for a certain amount of time to get into the natural environment, take it back out, treat it, and put it back into the system. All those options, all three of those options in today's terms are pricey. There's no doubt about that. How pricey they are, I don't know. But I can tell you they'll probably be more than our existing potable water today. But most of these options would take years to develop. A water reuse option may take 5, 10+ years to develop. And is the forecasting cost of potable water going to be high enough that we could justify that? I don't know what those answers are. If it's $5,000, $6,000 an acre foot, then from a pure number standpoint, unless there's a board will to do it, it probably won't make sense, unless there's a will to get another water resource. But if it's $3,000, $4,000 an acre foot in 10 years with the additional resource, that might be a different thought. But until that, identifying the funding source. I really can't answer any of those questions, and that's kind of why we came up with this scope to help answer those questions, because we just don't have the information.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, James, that was very helpful.
James, thank you. This information is great. My concern is when we're done with, assuming the board approves this, when we're done with it and we've spent $70,000 of ratepayers' money, that we have a definitive answer? Or does it just lead us to another study and another study, like Olivine has been doing? I mean, I just see that in our future. You all use the same consultant, and it seemed to work for them in the past. Just build upon study after study after study until you're in it too many. I know it'll come back to us for a decision, but I think we'll have half the board saying, oh yeah, we've already put 70,000, well, we already put 50,000, I think, in from the last one. We put 120,000, it's worth putting another 200,000 in. I don't know the answer to that. I'm just asking, maybe the committee can help me out with that. Is this study just a precursor to another study?
That was exactly our concern. That's why you didn't get the $500,000 proposal in front of us, because that just made no sense. We wanted to get a document that we could look at and say, just as James mentioned, if we decide to do this, it's going to take this amount of time and this amount of money. Are we interested? If all three options are, as James mentioned, $3, $5, $10,000 an acre foot, even in 5 or 10 years, then the board's, I think the board's going to say, thank you very much. No. But we would then have something to point to and say, this is the reason we chose to do A, 1, 2, or 3. And then that's a path we take. But if the board looks at it and says, none of these options are viable, then we wash our hands of it and never hear about it again.
And let me just make sure that when you're saying water reuse, you're saying purple pipe.
Yes.
I don't want this board to make a decision on water reuse, direct or indirect, at this time.
Yeah. There's both. So there's actual indirect is in the evaluation and purple pipes in the evaluation. So they're both in the evaluation in this study. That's option 1 and option 3.
Well, the difference between indirect and purple pipe is one more treatment phase in a treatment plant.
Absolutely. But no purple pipe infrastructure.
Oh, I understand it's cost savings, but it's also a public question at that point.
Yeah, I don't know if it's cost savings, but yeah, either way. But just to be clear, there's 3 options. One's purple pipe. One is, is there extra water out of this basin, and can we get it and treat it and just use it for drinking water? And the third one is, can we use this basin for indirect potable reuse? Those are the 3 options that this study is evaluating, because that's the 3 main funding sources available for us.
Director Snella first.
Just to clarify too, so that the indirect option, we would purchase water that's treated to a certain level, we'd put it into the ground, let it mix around there, then we would then in turn pump it out of the ground and then pump it to Meadowlark?
No.
Or what would we do with it?
So 2 ways, right? There's 2 options with that. You could treat it, you could add a treatment train at Meadowlark to treat it to advanced treatment, and then pump it into the groundwater basin, and then take it out and put it into a microfiltration plant, a small batch plant, to put it into the system. That's one option. The other option is if EWA ever does develop its water reuse, and they have 17 million gallons of raw water that's treated to advanced levels, coming right into the aqueduct right within San Marcos, then we would take a portion of that, put it into the groundwater basin, allow it to mix in, take it out, again put it into a microfiltration plant and send it out. Those are probably options. Those are what I'm thinking in my head. I haven't had that discussion with the consultant yet. I want to see what they come up with.
Craig, you're on that committee too.
Yeah,
Can you
I just
chime in,
want-
because I'm interested to hear what, because obviously you and Jim, you really dove into this being on the committee, but also, you have a water background, so, can you chime in?
Yeah, like Jim said, we were staring at a 500 to 650,000 scope of work to figure out, basically to try to answer some questions, and it was our direction to back up and develop a scope that's a little bit higher level, a lot less costly, to be able to get to some point to make some decisions. Now, this is kind of like the analysis of whether we proceed with desal or not. Desal is, about $2,300 an acre foot. And, at the time that was proposed, treated imported water was roughly $900 or $1,000 an acre foot. But the projection with where imported water costs were going made it, maybe 10 years out, those lines will cross, and this makes it a viable project. I think we're looking at something parallel here, that we're probably talking on the order of, thousands of dollars an acre foot to do something, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know the numbers, but I doubt it's going to be under $4,000 an acre foot. Then we're going to look at the projection of what potable water is going to be.
Right.
And then the board will have that information.
But that's the purpose of this study, is to get to some decision point. It's not to be a launching point for some bigger study. It's to be able to finally make some decisions.
And unlike the desal, though, where it's perfectly clear there's plenty of water, in this case, we may come to one of these plans that we like, but find out there's no water. Then we have to put in recycled water.
Yeah, and it could be there isn't physically water, or legally there isn't water. So an important component of this is that legal review, to look at a legal basis as to
And is
whether.
that included in this
Yeah,
study?
yeah, that's one of the optional tasks that we went.
That's why I went to 70.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to what Director Earl was saying is, the purpose of the study is to kind of give you that roadmap, but also give you the risks. These are your legal hurdles, and it's going to take you 10 years to develop this. With those legal hurdles. So it's not only to give you the dollars per acre foot, to give you an idea of the timeline and the risk involved. So that if we go down this road, not only are we looking at, and I'm just guesstimating on a number here, $4,000 an acre foot, but you're not going to know how much water you're really going to get until you're $2-3 million in, and that's the risk. And then once you know that, it might take another 2-3 years to get over the legal hurdles, or maybe 5 years to get over the legal hurdles. This is all going to be done at a 50,000 foot level. So there will be a lot of, based on the estimate, based on this is what you're going to get. But it's still coming from a lawyer, it's still coming from a firm who does this on a more regular basis, and it's still going to be an educated platform for the district and the board to launch or to stop.
I'd like to add, the other important thing was we wanted to be able to identify potential grant funding opportunities in advance before we go any further down any kind of road, because that really can make the difference on whether a project's viable or not, what kind of grants or grant funding you might be able to get. So we wanted that as one of the decision points early on.
And I appreciate your patience with working with me on this. And I know, Director Hernandez, this has been a deep passion of yours since I've been involved with the board, and I've always appreciated your innovative spirit on this matter and a lot of others. I'm skeptical. I think you guys probably picked that up from my questions, and I don't quite understand it all either, and I can admit to that. And I think it's a bit of a moonshot in many different ways. But I think that it's, you guys have put a lot of thought into it, and I think that it's something that we almost kind of need to put to bed once and for all.
Yes.
And I don't know if that passion and drive, Director Hernandez, that you have to explore this and to pursue this with pushing staff to do something, will be put to bed unless we go down this path. So while I'm skeptical, I think I can support it at this point, to at least go ahead and take a look and see what we can find out.
Thank you. Director Martin?
Yeah, and I too, I'm very, hard to believe I'd be a skeptic. But I'm very skeptical. I think if this will put it to rest one way or the other, I'm comfortable at $70,000, but the 50 that we spent a few years ago was ratepayers' money, and that's gone, and we got nothing for it. So hopefully we're gonna get something from this, either A, B, C, or D, drop it, because there isn't anything there. And we go make a decision from that. I mean, this district hit a home run 15, 20 years ago when our forefathers said, let's go with desal, and there were skeptics on the board at the time. And
Oh,
they
yeah.
hit- they hit a home run with it. But then that happens, and sometimes you hit a zero with it. I also look at Olivenheim spending $2 million, and I look at their building they're in that was built in 1942. So they spend the money differently.
They're working on a new building, though.
Yeah, right. They've been doing that for years. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I had two questions before I made my final comments, and it was probably in the report, and I'm sorry, I did not read the whole thing this time. How did our ground basin rank in that groundwater management priority?
It's not, it's a low priority basin, so there's no funding. Funding for high priority and medium priority basins exist from a cleanup and abatement and, you know, from an overall quality standpoint. But the San Marcos Basin, and I forgot the number, but it's not even on the radar. So there's no,
But what was that based on?
the state.
State?
The state prioritizes basins based on, I'm sure, contamination level, size, vulnerability. There's a bunch of different criteria, and I can't speak to it because I'm not very well versed on how the state does that. But San Marcos Basin wasn't even an identified basin until more recent history. And then it became an identified basin. It's really kind of a sub-basin that feeds into the greater Carlsbad Basin. But even with that being identified, it's a low priority basin, which means that as far as Sigma and others, both good and bad, both funding sources and state regulations, it's really below their radar probably for some time.
Well, that gives me a second question, and that is, if we're a sub-basin to Carlsbad Basin, is that any sort of an obligation for us if we decide to draw water from it?
No, when it got identified as a separate basin, and I can't remember the date, but I want to say it was in the 80s or early 90s, which is recent, you know, then basically it becomes its own entity. But it was
Okay.
always considered prior to a sub-basin to the Carlsbad.
Okay, so that was just a new thought that came to mind. And then I was just wondering, on this water, do you feel our district is in need of more water than what's available if we were to expand our usage from the desal and the other options that we have available to us already?
I would say no, we're not in need of water, but I think any district should always be looking to explore all opportunities, because imported water is getting harder and harder to come by and more expensive and less reliable. So local water supplies are important. We do have the advantage of being able to increase our desal take, which is a really good ace in the hole that this district has, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't explore other opportunities.
Great, I agree. We should explore them all. And I really do appreciate the committee's effort and research. You've done a great deal of information, and I would have to agree with Mike that I don't know a whole lot about what you're speaking of in detail, and I do understand why you want to do this study and be able to lay this to rest. Totally agree with that. My only concern, and I'm a little skeptical, but at this point I don't have enough information to know for sure there isn't something, and we don't know what the future will be in 10 or 30 or 40 years. My only skepticism is our budget. We're already deferring maintenance, current maintenance, and deferring projects and scrounging pennies right now. And I know 70,000 sounds to some people on one hand it's a lot, and to some it isn't. My feeling is this is very important, but if I were to prioritize expenses, I don't think I could say to my ratepayers that this was as high a priority as some other things for the 70,000. So if there were a way to delay this a few years before we spent the money, I think I'd feel more comfortable, especially with the climate change and all the stuff going on with the water fix, and it's really hard to know. So I think it's a very worthy cause. I just would have a hard time supporting it this time and telling my ratepayers that I spent 70,000 to put to bed, to me, a lower priority item.
Yes,
Yeah, just as a suggestion to that, maybe another option would be to work this into the next year's budget process. to make it a budgeted project. Wouldn't delay it, too long.
Director Moran?
I feel very comfortable with that. I agree with both directors. Or comfortable if staff comes back and tells us where they're gonna cut the 70,000 and replace it with this. And if staff thinks it's a big enough item or high enough in their agenda to cut something else that you might have had in there, a Jeep or something, whatever it may be, I don't know.
Well, then let me ask that question, because we know that we had the money budgeted for the shower improvement that we have reduced by more than $70,000. Could that $70,000 be looked at as part of that windfall?
Not directly, but as far as an overall budget, you'll have budget variances, both positive and negative. And I don't know where our year end's sitting right now, but but that would be a favorable variance. If, for example, from budgeted to actual on the bathroom job, for example, and this would be a new account, so this would be an unfavorable variance because it's a new item. Just to kind of state that this item was brought forward at the board and committee's request. So the priority on that is really a board and committee priority. And staff would be happy to move forward or defer it depending on what the board's priority is.
Well, I would agree with Glenn. Glenn, I'm sorry, sir. With Craig, it's not in the budget, and I agree with the other director as well. It's not in the budget. And is it a priority high enough to put into this budget and to make room for it? I don't know the answer to that. But my suggestion would be staff either find a way to do that or put it off and see if it fits in next year's budget. There's no rush. We're not going anywhere.
If I were able to identify savings in this year's budget that would cover the cost of this, would the board feel comfortable with that?
Yes, but please don't use the bathroom. We could build a new complex with the money you should be saving.
If I find savings other than the bathroom, savings, would the board feel comfortable with that?
I would, yes.
I would offer a motion then, that we allow the manager to research to see if there is savings that would accommodate the item number 2.4. And I think I need to hold that.
You can still make it and have discussion.
Okay, very good, thank you.
I'll second that.
Very good, there's a second. Now, sir, I'm sorry, I was a little advanced in my discussion. We have a public speaker, a gentleman that your name, sir?
Mike Hunsaker for the record, 115 Equestrian Court. There are a number of reasons to think this is very unlikely to be appropriate. I'd like the study to consider the following factors. Number one, if you have a drought and there's no water, there's no rainwater to revise this, what happens to our investment? There was a big basin up in Twin Oaks, and I talked to an owner who had used it for over 100 years, not him personally, but his
He
family.
must be really old.
Yep. And it's dry. That's a basin. That was as big, probably as capacity as this one. The second issue is we'll probably have to recharge this thing because the capacity is low. How are you going to recharge it? There's no space for doing flooding. And as your consultant mentioned, injection wells don't work. And the reason they don't work is because of biofouling. And they have this problem with fracking, so they add formaldehyde to the water they inject to push out the oil, because otherwise biofouling is a big issue. And biofouling has also reduced the Poseidon desalinization output because of algae blooms and such. So how are you going to recharge this? Then if you do recharge it, who owns the water? This is right smack in the middle of downtown. The new developers, can they put in a well? What about the city if it decides to start doing more irrigation using groundwater? What happens if it pulls that all out? Power costs, we are going probably into CCAs. And the cost increase of power, which has been historically about 5% a year, could well go over 10%. I think we should be considering much more major cost power increases than we've had in the past. The other issue is if you do desalting, well, you have concentrated waste. If that goes down to Encina, that makes that any water salvation they have much more expensive. I don't see this as being at all practical. Thank you.
Thank you, very good. Any further discussion?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, so, again, for my education, and I think the speaker did raise a question that I don't know the answer to, so if we went with, James, the indirect reuse option, and how would we put the water into the ground? How does that process work generally?
So in my previous life, my first job out of college, I worked on groundwater injection extraction wells up in Monterey, Seaside, and East Bay Mud. The technology is much better then because that was a long time ago. Because decades and decades and many decades ago, back when I was a young man. But essentially, what a lot of groundwater injection for now, this is for recycled water. This is for potential potable water. We're talking clean water, so there's no biofouling, there's no sediment. This is not recharge basins where you separate a flood or flow from a river and go into a big recharge areas and let it just kind of drain down.
Okay.
You have biofouling there because you have natural elements of the raw water. So what we're talking about is advanced treated water, which basically has less, as far as it's RO water, it's desal water, essentially, for the most part, being put into the ground. So it's clean water, there's no biofouling. The existing extraction wells could be used to run backwards to pump water into the ground if the basin is appropriate, which means, and this is a lot of stuff we don't know, and this study is not going to address actually any of Mr. Hunsecker's questions because that's the $650,000 study plus the $2 million study to address every one of those questions. So, but that would be one option. So as far as from how water gets back in, if you had a basin that was appropriate, you could put water back in through the extraction wells and then pump it back out. And we were doing that back in the 90s before the groundwater treatment rules changed. That was probably one of my main jobs, and when the rules changed, I got laid off from my first job. So.
Wow. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Couldn't we use Walnut Grove Park in that area for spreading? Just joking, Mr. Hunsaker.
Well, I'm not.
That's where you live.
I know. He doesn't live in that zone, but there are a couple of spreading areas that potentially could be used. But that being said, any other questions?
I would just comment, if it turns out this is a viable resource, the recently passed Sustainable Groundwater Management Act will come into play and I think address a lot of these questions. I know the county's working with some groundwater basins right now and is actually doing some pretty good work, but it's that's what's going to overtake a lot of the groundwaters in California, that act. So.
Very good.
And one of the legal portions is adjudication. So does the basin need to be adjudicated? How do you ensure that the water you put into the basin, you get out, and that's through adjudication.
Very good.
And we know how long the attorneys can tie that up.
Oh, yeah. So
Part of that $2 million.
it's not a
Well,
one.
it's what's nice, the Sustainable Act now is sort of, the adjudication thing's not as important, okay? It's something that could potentially be there, but what it demands is that all of the people that are using that groundwater basin basically get together and figure out what's a sustainable way to keep it going, or the state will come in and run it for you, so. There's been a real incentive.
No, we don't want that.
GSAs.
Any further questions? We have a motion and a second?
But can you repeat it, please?
Oh, motion is to direct the general manager to, if he can find the amount of money necessary for the contract, to approve the proposal service contract and begin the
If you
study.
can find cuts that amount to
Whatever,
the same.
yes, whatever you can.
You can find it,
the
I'm
money.
sure it's
Yeah.
there, and we got reserves,
Yes.
right? So, okay.
So is this a tentative approval of the agreement, or do you want us to come back after we've identified
Oh,
funding
yeah,
source?
please
Oh,
do.
please come back.
Please come back.
Yeah.
We'll re-agendize the item.
Please come back, re-agendize, no further days.
All right. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Moving on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again.
Thank you, James. Thank you, sir. All right. Oh, yeah. One step. Item number 2.5, Metropolitan Water District Local Resource Program Application.
All right, we just talked about a way to spend money, now we're gonna talk about a way to bring money into.
See how it all works.
This could be our savings, right? So, in order to encourage local water supply development, the Metropolitan Water District came up with a program to help fund these type of local projects to minimize the cost differential between imported water supplies and locally developed water supplies. They call this program the Local Resource Program, or LRP, and provides a financial incentive for every acre-foot of water that you produce to close the gap between the two costs of water. And staff believes that our purchase of desalinated water qualifies for the Metropolitan program. We are under contract.
Quick question, not to cut you short. Didn't they agree this years and years ago? We can't get any money from them because of our lawsuit?
So I could, the
That's where he's
the
going.
staff report
I was
addresses that a
cutting to the
little
chase,
bit.
I'm sorry.
So that, with the legal resolve in the courts, that's changed. So the courts determined that the San Diego County water agencies were illegally barred from the Metropolitan LRP program. So the program is now effectively open to us. It raises some issues because the LRP program says a project can't be under construction or producing water at the time you apply for it, and our project is, but we're gonna say you need to rewind the clock. You should have judged the project as it was when we submitted the application before you illegally barred us. So, anyway, so we do purchase 3,500 acre feet per year of desalinated water, and that's about a fourth of the district's current supplies. If we were to be eligible for the LRP program for the full amount of 3,500 acre feet at the highest incentive amount that Metropolitan offers, that would be a revenue stream of about $1.6 million per year to the district for a term of about 15 years. So it's quite a bit of money that we're talking about. I do have to point out that the Metropolitan's LRP program is a discretionary program. That means they get to decide whether they want to award the project or not. So there may be some uphill battles in here, but they want to point out that there's no guarantees. In order to be eligible, you do have to submit an application to Metropolitan. Metropolitan only accepts applications from its member agencies, which is the County Water Authority. So we would have to prepare an application, send it to the Water Authority, they would have to sponsor it, and then send it forward to Metropolitan. We're working with the Water Authority right now. They have some issues with they have a pending litigation against Metropolitan regarding the funding source of their LRP, so they need to internally reconcile that, but the Water Authority told us to go ahead and submit the applications. They would process it through the board, and then make a determination whether they can sponsor those applications. We are partnering with the city of Carlsbad on this. It's our recommendation that we partner with Carlsbad on this application. Carlsbad also purchases desal water. They purchase 2,500 acre feet per year. So combined, we purchase 6,000 acre feet per year of desalinated water. The two agencies have retained a consultant to help us prepare the application and to help guide and shepherd that application through the process of both CWA and MWD. There's no cost to submit the application. So there are consultant costs, and those are covered in the existing budget, but there's no cost to submit an application, and there's no financial risk. So we could submit an application, and if they tell us no, we're done. If they tell us yes, but you're limited to X number of acre feet, then it's better than the position we're at right now. So all we're doing right now is seeking the board approval to go ahead and submit the application through the Water Authority, ultimately to Metropolitan, for the LRP program for our supply of desal project.
Director Evans.
I would like to, that we do approve that and submit it. As the GM has said, there's a couple of issues, but I really don't believe that the County Water Authority is going to deny us. And really, I've talked with Maureen, and I've also talked with Mark Muir, as well as just the board in general. I think Padre Dam is also in a situation very similar to this. So it's really going to fall on Metropolitan being where they are just discretionary value on if they want to give it to us and if they want to argue about the under construction. But I think it's very wise for us to go ahead and do it and get something back. It'd be great.
A question, if it is discretionary and they just want to, punish us, do we have any recourse?
Well, we'd hate to threaten litigation,
Yeah.
but that's something that they have to be cognizant of. All indications are that Metropolitan really wants local agencies to be submitting these applications.
Mhm.
Whether they'll hold our affiliation with the County Water Authority against us in the evaluation of that application remains to be seen. Our desal project is going to be very unique in that it'll probably be the only project that they look at that is already under construction or producing water at the time they evaluate the application. So they'll have to treat that one carefully, but I think we have a great argument with the roll the clock back to when we submitted the application. And if you, but for your illegal barring us to be qualified, we would have been getting these incentives already.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, sir.
What's our cost to have this advisor advise us on how to do this?
the consultant, Vallecitos' share is $12,000.
Oh, okay. Cheap enough.
Any further questions? Then I think we need a motion to authorize the submittal.
To approve.
Second.
You have a speech?
Yep. Oh, sorry again, sir, I got your, and I circled it this time. Well, we got, that we can still discuss, thank
That's
you.
right, that's right.
Yes, your name, sir?
Mike Hunsaker, still live at 115 Equestrian Court in San Marcos. I support the application, but I think this is mostly a fire drill and political issue. If you want to make desal water look more attractive, what we're doing here is probably taking money from the other water sources, sales, and adding it to the desal. So we're upping the competition for desal. The incentive is very profitable for us and worthwhile trying. I'd just like to know who gets the incentive money. Does it go directly to us? Or is it some offset? Just how does that work? Thank you.
It comes directly to the agency that made the application.
Who's on?
So it'd come right to Vallecitos. The Water Authority wouldn't take a cut of it or anything like that. There's no processing and handling.
Any further questions? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good, item taken care of. That's the end of the action items. The general manager's report.
Okay, 4 quick items. Given the outbreak of fires in Southern California, I want to commend Operations Manager Pedrazzi. He proactively went out there, worked with his operations staff to make sure all of our reservoirs at a higher level. We're not letting the water levels drop as low as possible. In the event that fires broke out in this area, we want to make sure we're prepared. So thank you, Ed. I do appreciate that. Tonight, Vallecitos crews will be working along San Marcos Boulevard, right in front of Churchill's. A fire hydrant was knocked down. We're doing some repair work, and we do have to close down one of the eastbound lanes. The closure will start at 8 o'clock tonight, and we think it'll take 5 or 6 hours to complete the work. So by the morning rush hour, the traffic lanes will be open again. There may be some follow-up work to repair the sidewalk that may happen on another day, but it won't require a lane closure.
I'm just curious if the person who hit it left their license plate behind or a calling card?
I don't know about this specific one, but
Do
Ed
we know?
can address
Yes.
that.
Will we get some money
Ed
back?
knows.
There's Ed.
Ed
Ed knows
Ed
all.
knows all.
Yes, this was finally one that didn't happen at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Ah.
And the person who hit it stayed behind, so we have all of our information and,
That's so nice to hear.
yeah, so we will be reimbursed for this one.
Oh, good. Now, who does the reimbursement?
The insurance company
Ah,
typically
his
is
insurance.
that
Oh,
person's
very good.
insurance company.
He is insured.
And does that include
That's
the
why you
water?
stay. Director
Yes.
Sinella.
Yeah, we charge them, unless I'm mistaken, finance, but we charge them for the water loss and all of the labor and materials to make the
Wow,
repairs.
That's very
quite a
good.
bit of money.
It will not be cheap.
Yeah. Director Sinella?
Great updates, Glenn, and I haven't been on social media, at least for the last 4 or 5 hours, but typically when we do close down a major lane, like San Marcos Boulevard, there's some sort of communication or public outreach through social media to the public to let them know that the road's gonna be impacted. You've been with me for 4 hours. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but I mean, can we look into that?
I'll look it up. Yeah, typically we do. I don't know if we did in this case.
Yeah, we've been working with the city, so we kind of assumed that since it's their road, they would take care of that.
I
Not
have
sure
seen
if-
that, I have seen that our PR folks have put things out before.
I'll
when
find
we've had
out if
road
they're doing
closures.
anything or not. I don't believe Chris said they were going to, but we can, I'm sure we could probably put something on our website.
Yeah, I have seen that quite frequently where the city does it. I don't know if they're doing it for us or we need to ask them to do it.
But
for
yeah,
us.
we have to pull permits with them
Yeah.
and work with them
Yeah.
on the road closure and all that.
Something to maybe check, and then also along the same lines, I know it's late and Chris has probably got home, but I think really neat what you guys are doing from the fire and adding the water perspective, very proactive, and that's, I think, a good message too, that we might want to communicate to our community and our ratepayers, so they understand that, that we're doing this, and it might kind of alleviate any concerns that they might have.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Let's see, my third item, just a reminder to the board that tomorrow night in this board chambers at 5 o'clock, we will be having the public scoping meeting for the water and sewer master plan. There's no expectations that the board members be there. It's a public meeting. The public's allowed. They come in, they provide their comments. We note them, and we include them in the scope for the environmental documentation. And then the last one, I just want to point out to the board that the staff has finished their review of the solar energy project proposals. We had 3 proposals, staff evaluated them. We had unanimous consensus on the number 1. So at the first meeting in January, on January 3rd, we'll be coming forward to the board with a recommendation for an award of an agreement. That's it. That's all I have.
Very good. Legal counsel.
It's come to my attention, I got an email from the Mr. Haddam from the Water Authority, that there's rumors circulating that the Water Authority has filed a new lawsuit against Metropolitan, and over the refusal of Met to basically turn over its 2016 rate models. And the general counsel for the Water Authority was really upset about these rumors and wanted to put them to bed and said that they're completely false. And basically what's going on is there was a lawsuit filed back in 2016 over the rate models. And basically this is taking, the court is finally catching up, and the discovery process is catching up with the law in motion and some of the other filings. And so there's some activity on that case. It was transferred up to San Francisco, and there were some delays. So, but anyway, I thought it was kind of interesting that he went to the trouble to refute these rumors and send out a notice, an email to all of the counsel for the member agencies. So that's all I have.
And if I could add that, one of the things the Water Authority is trying to do is show that they're trying to have a better working relationship with Metropolitan. And if the word comes out that they filed a new suit, that doesn't help that. So I think that's why
Right.
CWA's attorney was so quick to refute that rumor.
Very good. San Diego County Water Authority.
Well, there are a lot of rumors flying, and I'm glad that Mark brought that out. And at the conference we'll talk about in a little bit, I did talk with Randy Record and about the negotiating, the first meeting, and he said he felt very, that the meeting was very friendly and open-minded, and he feels that, that they're both working together. There's still people with hurt feelings and whatnot, but I thought that was good. And there is that, what you just said, that tag along, because a lot of things were stayed while the first case was settled. And now as we move forward, there's certain things you have to do in case you want to continue with those trials, even if you renegotiate and settle outside. Tomorrow's meeting, I think the one thing is most important is we will be making a decision as a board on whether or not we will be extending, on the QSA, if we're going to extend the words, and you need to help me, because my brain is, let me back up. Just came from Ventura late last night, and I was up there, and my grandkids and my son, their mom had gone to Vegas, and we were there and watched the fire and got the call to get out of the house, load up the kids in the dark, and the fire burned up to two houses to our sons. He's fine at this point, but I think it was the most frightening thing, and this is where Mike makes a great point to our staff, because you just don't realize until you're in the middle of it, not the frighteningness of it, but how many people you are relying on who do these amazing things behind the scenes. Not just the firefighters and the police, making sure we're moving, but people go into panic. So some people, you get this, I tweet in particular, there would be tweets that everybody has to leave, it's happening right here. I can see the hill, it's on fire. So we had some neighbors come pounding on our door saying, are you up, you have to go. But my son, who's very calm, was like, we can see where it is, and they're going to come through and tell you when it's time, because they don't want you all to evacuate at once. They put it in, we're recommending it, and then we're demanding it. But it was very frightening to be in a slow-moving, smoky lane of cars and seeing things at night on fire. It looks better in the daylight the next day, because you can see not as much burned as you thought, but it's still not pleasant. And I was very grateful that we have, and what we did with our fires, was it 3 years ago now? That they had the water, because there has been reports, and I don't know if it's true since we left, that Ventura was having trouble with pumps and getting water at some of their hydrants. And they had, the winds were horrific. Not only were they fast, but they would blow in one direction and do like a dust storm and just stop and then go the other way. You could see the tree there and the tree there, and you just realize what these firefighters are doing and how much water it takes. And then you're waiting for the water to come, and then there's the smoke and the coppers can't. And the hydrants are, I come away feeling very blessed, but very grateful for all those unknown people who do so many things that we take for granted. And the most interesting thing was, we ended up staying at a little couple's house. And the next morning, they were a little old couple, and they didn't really have anything to offer for the kids, and the kids were wild, so we said we'll go out and get some, breakfast. Well, we went to 6 McDonald's, and finally we just started calling. Nothing was open. There was no power through most of the city, and there were no employees. Everybody was home taking care of their own property or hiding in the emergency center. And it's like, you don't think about that. We finally found a little donut shop that was open, and they only had 3 kinds of donuts left: chocolate, chocolate, and pink with sprinkles. So the grandkids were really happy, but they were hyped. So when I come to this, I apologize, my head's not going to grab the words, but we are going to be making a decision on the QSA, on whether we will extend it so that the arrangement with Metropolitan and the arrangement with IID follow suit in time. Currently, we are going to 45, is it, with the agreement with IID?
Yeah, the transfer agreement is for
The
45
transfer agreement.
years. Yeah.
But the agreement we have with Metropolitan only goes to 35.
Yeah, and that's how we transport that water that we have.
Use our conveyance system. You've probably heard that there's a lot of talk about, well, maybe we'll just, build our own canal and bring the water from Colorado, and they are kind of doing what you gentlemen are doing on the engineering thing, looking at all the options. But since this is coming down to a crunch, we need to extend, so whether we build something 20 years from now or not. So I just want you to know, I will be voting that we extend so the 45 match, and it's not that we can't have a change down the road if necessary. I know we were talking, the GM and I were talking about it, and we think there's a 5-year clause where you can review it. But but I talked to someone else and they said, no, that wasn't it. Well, they were there and then when the whole thing was signed, but I don't know if their memory was correct. But either way, that's the way to go. We need Metropolitan and we need our conveyance, and I don't think any of our singular ratepayers in the audience, I'm sorry, you all pay. I just feel like they don't want us to spend about 3 times what it would cost to have done the desal.
Yeah,
That's where we're at.
very
So,
good.
Thank you.
Capital Committee, we had a Capital Committee meeting this morning, and we're finishing up on the plant expansion. Interesting, the covers for the, I call them the pits. Apparently, the contractor was halfway in bankruptcy, or went into bankruptcy, but we have them, they're finishing, everything is good, we're moving on. That's very positive. Policy and Finance.
Yeah, the Encina Policy and Finance Committee met yesterday. We established the Board of Directors meeting dates for 2018. We reviewed the fiscal year 2017 comprehensive annual financial report, and we reviewed the status of the 5-year strategic business plan.
Very good. Standing committees, any committee meetings this month? Yes?
Finance, and you heard about it already tonight, but we approved the audit report from the auditors.
Very good. We did not have a,
And sent it to the board.
yes. Thank you. No engineering committee this month. Directors, meetings and conferences. Director Sennell.
Yeah, the only thing I attended since the last time we met was the CSDA dinner down in San Diego, and we had a presentation from the new executive director from League of California Cities, and he gave us kind of an overview of his vision and his background and experience.
I have 2 reports, one from the JPIA and the other from Aqua. The Aqua I'll have to give at the next meeting because I left my dog ate my homework. And I left my book at home for the 4 days there. But the JPI, I can give you the total gist, very interesting. I enjoy all of it, but I really enjoy that part because they have some really good technical stuff. I think the biggest takeaway I got out of it was the general manager was very interesting. He was really high on the program of taking all the reserve funds that the JPI has, about $50 million, and opening, he hated this word when I brought it up, opening a shell company in Utah with just an office and one person on the board has to live in Utah. But that's not a shell, according to him. And taking the $50 million and put a board of directors together, which could be the same as JPIA, doesn't have to be the same as JPIA, but putting them in because they can invest the money. Right now, we get less than a 2% return. I think that's right, Tom, 2% return on the money that's being invested in quality things like local governments, counties, things that we need. Once you take it to this, he'd hate me saying this shell, you can invest it in different ways and potentially much higher risk, but potentially get 5.5% to 6.5% return on your investment, which financially makes sense, but there's a risk factor there that you have to determine. You're dealing with OPM, other people's money, but it was very interesting the way he started out. He started out, if we, and at the end of the conversation, when we, and it was like, wow, well, you're not too high on it, because he wants to bring this up for a vote in the spring. And it was just the general people just got a hold of it at that meeting. Prior to that, maybe the executive committee knew about it, what they were doing. And I don't know if it's right or wrong. I'm just stating that, even though he hates me calling it a shell company, that's what a shell company is, when you use a rented office and have one meeting a year over there and one person living in that state. It is what it is, but he didn't like that because it didn't sound good. But, so that'll be coming up in the springtime. He's hoping. A lot of people tried to get him to defer it to doing it in the fall, so there's more time for people to talk about it. And some of our leading general managers were leading in that direction. Mr. Orant, who you talked about earlier, and a few others were like, yeah, you mean taking all your money, bringing it in another state? Yeah, so, but he was very high on that, so. Andy, thank you very much. GPI report done.
Very good.
All right, I attended the Aquafall conference as well last week. I attended the Energy Committee meeting on Tuesday. Some of the major topics were PUC interconnection issues for renewable projects, and the PUC person there was explaining how they're trying to streamline that process. A lot of talk about the community choice aggregation, which Mr. Hunsaker mentioned earlier. It's becoming very popular, and it's essentially buying electricity on the direct access market through aggregating of demands with multiple customers. So it has a potential. It's become so popular in the state that, for instance, PG&E service territory, they're looking at the potential of these CCAs taking away up to 50% of their load in the coming years. So it's going to have some huge, huge impacts on the investor-owned utilities. A lot of discussion on pump storage projects, which, you know, pumped water storage is really the only way to effectively store energy. So they're getting renewed interest. One of the interesting statistics that was talked about was that the target of meeting demand through 50% renewables is going to be met by 2020, which is a full 10 years before the deadline date. So renewable projects have been very popular, and that kind of brings another issue, and I'm glad to hear that we're making some progress on possibly some solar projects here, because there's a cap on some of these programs, particularly like the remote net metering type projects. There's I think a 250 megawatt cap statewide. They say that's filling up rapidly, so if we're going to contemplate doing a project, we're probably going to need to get going with it probably in the next year or so. Wednesday, I attended a forum on the California water fix. It appears to be finally some critical mass developing on actually having a project, and it's probably due to the fact that the environmental documentation is done and it's under review. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of lawsuits over it, but it seems like we're moving finally toward a project, and a lot of the talk was that maybe a smaller project, maybe smaller tunnels and intakes, and maybe just one tunnel to try to cut costs, but it looks like there's finally going to be some kind of project. The other big discussion item was the lack of the federal government's participation in the water fix, and it's a $17 billion project as it stands. And while they assure everyone they support the project financially, they said they're not going to participate, which is, I think, fraught with political difficulties. I'm sure that's going to change, and I think that's a negotiating stance that they're starting out with. Let's see, on Thursday in the attorney's program, I attended a session on alternative ways of delivering or implementing water projects, primarily through what's termed P3s, public-private partnerships, and interesting discussion on alternative ways from the traditional design, bid, build kind of process. So there's actually about 6 or 7 different ways of delivering projects. There's design, build, build, operate, and there's the whole range. The interesting thing I find is that the presenters all have foreign accents. So it's something that's done a lot in other countries, but very little so far in this country. So probably some institutional barriers to that. I attended a federal issues forum, primarily the Bureau of Reclamation and Army Corps of Engineers giving updates. The BUREC, again, was obsessed with the lack of their participation in the California water fix and their justification for not participating in that. The Army Corps of Engineers, I think, are still trying to figure out how they fit into things with the new administration in Washington, so more to come on that. Friday, I attended the Hans Doe breakfast, and they had a presentation on Northern California fire response. They showed some first-person eyewitness videos that were extremely scary. I mean, these people that were literally outrunning the flames and the sparks flying through the air. And it was pretty scary, but very good presentation. And that's it.
Director Evans?
Well, he did a wonderful job at doing that conference.
Good.
I will just have a few things data on the JPIA has done a good job on that part. I just want to throw out, on one of the ones I was watching, they were just talking about the perks that they offer. And one of the things that kind of surprised me was that you can get a 60% discount for hearing aids, and you are able to pass that on to family members. So I thought, wow, I wonder if all our employees know that, and if they don't, we need to tell them, so they'll be really excited what their insurance provides. And then they did this really crazy little video about eyeglasses. They were talking about the VSP program, and the eyeglasses that are come where you have like the Fitbit in the lens, so you can see what you're doing every second of the day right there on your lens. I am breathing, my heart is beating, my feet are moving. But they had it to this really upbeat music, for the young crowd. And you can imagine the crowd there wasn't exactly young. But that was really interesting. You don't think about the kinds of perks that are available. So I'll just throw that out. It was very interesting. I also, rather than get into the whole thing with which ones I went through, I was very impressed to see we had a lot of representation from San Diego County. There were several people from the County Water Authority that were panelists and moderators, but we had Gary Arant and Tom was on the panel, and it was really nice to know that you're in an area that's wanted and informed and innovative and caring and manages to be someone they want at these panels. Because sometimes I've gone to ones where you're just, like you say, they talk a foreign language or they're talking about, just a community does it. It was very, very interesting, appreciate that. And the final one was on water. It was about watersheds, headwaters, but it actually turned out being more about insurance on them. The one guy got up and spoke about how the climate's changing, the water's coming in different ways, but the following person is a reinsurance individual, and I did not know that reinsurance people are the ones who insure the insurance companies. And this was a global company, and they were talking about how in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to see a very massive change in insurance, because with these major disasters and so many happening at once, they're even looking into changing the insurance so it's not what you have and we reimburse you when you get it back. You go get your refrigerator, you do your house. They're thinking of making more of a limits where they will release money immediately because they realize they're not addressing the needs of the people in today's world, and we need to be a lot faster. I had no idea there was such a company, but it's very fascinating. So I expect great changes. It was an excellent conference. They had way too many sessions that were actually really superb, and I was constantly saying, do I do this one or do I do that one? A couple I tried to hit 2 at a time. That doesn't work very well.
Very good. I too attended and ditto on everything that everybody else has said. But there was 2 things. One, we will have a box of boxing gloves at the front door. Having attended the sexual harassment conference, mandatory, Al and I, it's going to be essential that we all put them on because you can't be touching people, can't be hardly talking to them at all. Hugging, oh my God, you're going to jail that night. So forget that. So that was disheartening, but I guess that's the way of the world. The other one was the Hans Doe breakfast. I thought it was gonna be a bit boring, but the video was pretty incredible, and of the people, there was one person that died in the car that the video was being taken from. He ran into a ditch, I didn't hear the rest of it, I mean, he didn't explain the rest of it, but it was, I mean, just that serious. And one of the things that came out of it that I am going to be presenting my children with this Christmas is a go bag. You need to have a go bag. And you also need, and I'm going to do this when they open it, I'm going to give them a piece of paper and a pencil, and in 5 minutes, write down what they would take in 5 or 10 minutes. Because my partner, he lived in Rancho Bernardo, he had enough time to grab a backpack and his kids, and they were out the door when he was at my home watching the first televised report was in front of a burned out house that was his. So he lost everything except what was in the 4 backpacks that everybody took. So that's what stuck home with me. So I'll be having that in my front door. Yes?
I need to add something. I forgot about
Oh.
the sexual harassment thing, which I found most interesting. Because, yeah, they're very strict on it, and they love suing people with deep pockets, like any government agency, because they get a lot more than if they just sue Clyde, who doesn't have anything. But 2 statements that I heard there, which I liked, was the difference between a hug and a grope is a matter of opinion. I thought that was pretty good. And the difference between a hug and a grope is a matter of inches. So I think both of those are very appropriate for us to be very, very aware of.
Yes. And that takes care of item 3.6. 4.1, meetings?
No, it's
Okay.
just information about the upcoming.
Oh,
CASA
just the
conference.
upcoming.
That's all it is.
We are traditionally dark in our last meeting of December. Do you anticipate we're going to need one?
I don't anticipate that we'll need it, but we do have a follow-up item to talk about
Yes.
after this meeting that
Very good.
may or may
All right.
not need it.
Very good. Director's comments? Yes, sir? None?
Don't forget, we still have 2 meetings this month.
That's what we just talked about.
No, we have 2,
The 12th and the 13th.
12th and the 13th.
Oh, yes, thank
Legal
you.
counsel
You
interviews.
made it sound like you weren't going to see us.
No,
No such luck.
I'm sorry.
Your holiday gift I had in the
I'm
car.
sorry, I'm thinking of something else.
It's on top of the car. It was too big to fit in the car.
Comments? No. I do have a comment. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be the president for the next year. I'm going to ask for a little more direction from the president as relative to conversations. We've got too many people stepping on each other and the manager, and so let's let one person speak, and then I'll recognize the other, and if I'm not, Hal will certainly slap me, so he's within arm's reach, so we'll try to get everything in order. And we have, I think that's closed session, isn't it? That discussion?
Yes.
Continuation?
Yep.
So with that, we are adjourned.